Hello, I'm Evan Raskob. I work at the CCI at UAL. I'm the course leader for BSc Computer Science there, and this is my talk on GridLib for the Alpaca Festival 2025. There was a problem with recording, so that's why I'm re-recording it at home. So GridLib is a library for live coding complex 3D printing patterns. Talking about this, so my practice is to code 3D printers live on stage. When you're live coding 3D printers, they are a physical object and plastic melts. So the problem is that whatever you do, you have to keep on going very quickly. Every time you pause, the plastic could drip. Every function that you create shapes real materials. There's no undo. It's not like audio or video where if you make a kind of fun little aesthetic mistake or glitch or whatever, then it just sounds interesting. This one has effects that last because they're physical. So probably the problem why live coding is hard, beyond the time sensitive part, is that also it's unpredictable. So the temperature of your room might vary. In fact, I gave a performance at the ICLC conference in Barcelona just recently, and it was really hot in the room and the printer crashed a few times during the performance. So the material may change, the printer may change. It's not something that's designed to be taken out of a lab. The cognitive load of creating complex forms on the fly procedurally is quite high. You have to keep a lot of maths and geometry in your head. You have to remember what you're trying to do and how you're trying to modify it. And again, if you make mistakes, they last and they can ruin the entire performance. Also, there's a problem of combining forms. So if you want to make a whole performance where things run together, you have to take care of starting, stopping, and merging together different forms over time. And this can be difficult unless you want to stop and then remove the plastic. So this is why I created GridLib. This is very practice-based. It's definitely a work in progress. It's very experimental code, so I caution you if you want to actually look at the code behind it. It was designed for continuous path-based 3D printing, so real pure research into what it means to keep the print head moving to create different paths. A lot of it's designed for performances which have time, so you want to kind of maximize the time of it and the interestingness of shapes, so it's not necessarily designed for classic 3D printing where you want to make an object that is actually useful. So mostly for live coding 3D printing or playing around with artistic outputs. It consists of some presets, modifiers, and timelines. So the idea is that you get preset shapes that you can modify instead of having to, again, work with the cognitive load of creating new geometric shapes while you're performing. And it works with the VisLib visualizer, which is part of the live printer ecosystem, which is my system for live 3D printing. You can see here there's three different types of presets here. There's a zigzag on the left, which was interesting. I thought it filled up space quite interestingly, and it's quite easy to represent in code. In the middle, you have a polygon, and that can be any sided polygon there. That's a general shape that I have. And there's also a line. So between the three of these, with some modifiers applied to them, you can get some interesting shapes. So the core technique is to take these shapes, these sort of 2D shapes, which are point-based. So they each one of the shapes is an actual set of physical points. And then we can modify them in space and over time via functions like sine, cosine, sawtooth, and triangle waves. So it's a bit like when you're using audio and you want to modify a waveform over time. Of course, the time is in points iterated, so not musical or physical time, at least in the GridLib library, although Live Printer does have the capability to modify things in physical time. I will just say, as an aside, it was quite difficult to use physical or printing time to get things to work because of getting layers to match up. So this takes care, since it uses indexes, it takes care of matching up layers by layers, no matter what kind of style that you're printing in. So you could see at the bottom, you could take a base polygon and you could kind of modify the points, turn it to a bit more of a circle or something more undulating by applying a sine wave over time, say applied to the radius that generates it or even to just XY points. So another main technique that GridLib provides here are iterators. Iterators will just go through all the points in a shape over time because it helps to have keeping track of that. So it gives you automatic traversal of points. So if you want to print the entire shape, you can do that. If you want to print a shape point by point and then modify it further in live coding, you can do that. Again, the tweaking stuff live is quite difficult. but it gives you that possibility. You can also attach data to points. Since it's written in JavaScript, it's quite free, for better or for worse, of what kind of data you can add to different points. So you can add like time, you can add MIDI notes to it in order to make musical sculptures, beat and speed, a lot of things. So down below you can just see that's just a quick visualization of a zigzag iterated in time, or sort of more of like a diagonal zigzag iterated in time. Sorry, iterated in indices over time, not time. So the core techniques here are, again, you specify points and layers for crossfading between shapes, and then you can use timelines and crossfades to specify lists of shapes. So not only do you have the iterators, but you can combine them together to make a timeline. So in other words, if I wanted to go from a hexagon to a grid, they're quite unrelated shapes, so you get a kind of really interesting crossfade between them if you try it. And it will take care of that for you. You can specify the amount of layers and points that you want to crossfade between. You can specify the amount of layers and points you want in the beginning object and the ending object, and you can combine as many as you want together. So it is a sort of timeline of shapes. So here's some examples, because it pays to see what's actually going on here. So this here is when I talk about the zigzag grid, this is a classic zigzag grid modified by sine and cosine over time. So each one of the points kind of branches out and comes back again. This is inspired by Bridget Riley. I'm a big fan of her work, so I saw she does these really interesting sine and cosine modified points except by hand. So this is definitely inspired by her work. This is an actual 3D printed shape. It's not very big. It's just a couple inches square, and then it's about I don't know, 20 millimeters high. Here's some various early experimental shapes from back. Actually, this actually slightly predates Gridlib. This is from before Gridlib, where I was trying to work and figure out what to do with these shapes over time. So some of these are actually modified by time and not indices. So some have incredibly high resolution, as you can see, like in the bottom right. Looks quite like a shell. And again, these are about, maybe something like 5 centimeters by, some are quite high, by 3 centimeters high. But you could see all the different kind of interesting shapes you make that are well beyond, I think, what you could do with just 3D modeling, because it's quite hard to model these without understanding the actual physical characteristics. This is a shape I made, again, a zigzag shape. Quite a few of these are zigzag shapes I have in this example because they're fun to play with. So this is one where, again, it gets modified over time. So it's like a big cousin to the Bridget Riley version. And this one's actually quite big. It was about, what was it, about like 12 centimeters wide by about like 8 centimeters high. So it's quite a substantial piece. And here's two fairly small ones, but looked at close up. So these are the polygons. These are quite high resolution polygons to make them more like circles. And you could see how they get modified over time. The radius, and I'm using both a radius modifier and an X modifier. So you get like these kind of like non-symmetrical variations in it. And I'm also changing the notes over time, so you can see some beating at the bottom of it, especially on the bottom left. You could see how the texture changes based on the speed in which I'm printing over time based on the indices. Yeah, they're the rippling effects, as I said. So this is sort of a demo that I have in this presentation, which just shows you the family of shapes that you can make using it, and also on the bottom right, you can see a timeline of shapes. So the top 3, you can see a zigzag shape, then a polygon shape of one type, which is sort of like an hourglass type shape, except very broad. Then there's like a really modified spiky polygon. And then the top right is like a boxy type shape, which is actually a line iterated back and forth, modified by sine waves. So by folding a line back on itself and then using sine wave modifiers, you can get some really fascinating shapes, especially if you do low resolution shapes like with 4 points. So the bottom right is where they'll get combined together into a really funky shape, which I have actually printed. I have versions of that. So summing up, challenges and reflections for it. This is really experimental and under development. I mean, it's not entirely clear where it's going. I think the idea of different forms that you can 3D print are interesting. Different fills, different properties that you get of different shapes is really interesting. And that's why it's quite loose, just to not really lock down any avenue yet or to make any kind of strict framework, but just to give us a place to experiment. Crossfading dissimilar shapes is very tricky. It's not something that's been super thought through yet. It's just something that came out of necessity for performance. But the idea of what to do for dissimilar shapes when you're making them on the fly layer by layer is really interesting. And that kind of follows with how to modify points without breaking the shape. So right now it doesn't look for physical constraints because it's just printing ones line by line. So you have to experiment and visualize and try things out. And part of the reason for that is that it's just very complicated to 3D print, and it's not always possible without understanding the physics of the exact printer and the situation of it and what you're trying to do. It's just not always possible to figure out what is actually printable. There have been some studies on that, but I think you can see from some of the experiments that you can push beyond that a bit. So how do we do this? That's an open question. Another thing is we can change the speed between points, but if you change speed and time, it can break the shapes. So when you're in a performance and you want to speed up or slow down, this can be very difficult because changing the speed maybe makes it go twice as far in the same amount of time, which might break the shape. Also, going too fast would maybe destroy the shape because printing quicker results in more brittle shapes and difficult printing. So some of what I'm using, as you can see in some of the shapes, is continuous polygons. So the idea of Vaz mode and making spiral shapes versus specific layers. So there's different options we have here, but still this is a difficult thing to do. And really the balance is the aesthetics, whether that's just the look and feel of it and the material or the performance with the music versus the reliability of what you're trying to do. So concluding, Gridlib is a new toolkit for live interactive 3D printing, which is quite a niche thing that I've been working on. It expands creative coding and performance, at least for this niche. And it's really early days, so it's something that I'm working on in terms of research and something that I'm open to questions and collaborations and ideas and maybe even more patterns about.